always on, because I think you kind of, I find after a season, you need a little bit of time, but then you get pretty hungry to get back at it right away. And like everybody else, everyone's desperate to talk about hockey, and I'm no different than that.
I understand. But do you spend much time in the rinks during the summer?
Off and on. I think sometimes with that spring hockey, you kind of have to be careful kind of what you're watching on that side of it. But I'd say kind of once, you go through some of the U15 programs, that's probably where you kind of pick it up in the spring, but then probably most of the focus starts again in August, truthfully.
And a lot of times 4 to 6 months can help with development, can't it, with the player? Like spring to summer?
Yeah, definitely. Especially at that age group, you don't know, like a half a year can make a big difference in terms of their development. And I find it sometimes there's so much movement. I think it's sometimes in the minor hockey level, if you're not even sure who's playing with what. And sometimes there's these stacked kind of spring teams. You're not sure who they're playing. And it's tough to get an apples to apples kind of view on everybody. But yeah, it's still good to be in the rinks and get a feel for that next age group coming through.
And this is a tough topic, and you can avoid it or you can answer it. How do we fix the problems when it comes to minor hockey at the AAA level, like the things that are going on?
Yeah, I know it's kind of there's ebb and flows. I find some years it just looks really good. Some years it's kind of like, wow, this is kind of all over the place. I think there's a ton of movement with players. Sometimes I think it's necessary. Sometimes I think it's overkill. I think a lot of times parents do a great job with their kid, and I think they get them to a certain level. And then sometimes they start listening to somebody they assume knows what they're talking about, and maybe that advice isn't great. And I think until you go through the process, but it's tough. I know going through it, even my parents, nobody had played hockey, nobody had an idea of it. And you're doing a great job playing AAA, and you think, what more can they do for their kid and that type of thing. But yeah, it's tough. I think when you look at some of the drafts just in the OHL, it's not necessarily have to go to a certain team to be drafted. I think people get told a lot of different things, but I think misinformation at all levels is always going to be tough. And I think sometimes we always laugh about the loudest people in the rinks usually know the least. And I think sometimes it's tough when you're a new parent coming through, because you just want to do what's best for them. So I don't think it's necessarily like there's a panic of knowing better, but I think they just want to make sure that it's like anything with athletics. You only have a certain amount of time, and you want to make sure you're making the best of it. But yeah, it's sometimes like everybody else, you kind of see things going on and you kind of shake your head too. But yeah, it's supposed to be fun. And I hope at the end of the day, everyone's still enjoying it, that process, which you should be.
Exactly.
So Kyle, just before we get into the Greyhounds a little bit, I just kind of wanted to get your take on this. So hockey, it seems, has turned into almost like a 12-month a year sport, right? It's constant now. Now up here in the Soo, I obviously coach football and involved in numerous sports up here. But now, we have kids missing because they have to go play spring hockey, then summer hockey, to your point, those types of things, right? Just what are your thoughts on, kids playing hockey year round at a young age? Are you a proponent for kids, playing multiple sports and trying different things, or do you think that in order to be successful, you need to put all your eggs in one basket at a young age?
No, I think at a young age, you want to increase that athleticism as much as you can. I think sometimes, it's funny, we play as a team, whether guys are throwing a football around or a baseball, and some guys can't even throw a baseball. And it's kind of like, I know for me, it's kind of like, and then there's other guys that are like, anything they pick up, they're just excellent at. And is that genetically God-given, or is that they were just thrown in everything? So I think at a certain age, it's important to play different sports. I think it's important to kind of, be around different athletes, be out of your comfort zone, because there's also that element too. I find sometimes in hockey and other sports, I'm sure are the same. You're not sure how much the guys enjoy it, because maybe you were just really good at it at a young age and you just play it because you're really good at it. And then when that kind of push comes to shove, and sometimes it's at our training camp when you're cutting a player, and that's the first time they've ever been cut because all the teams were selected going out. And that adversity, it's like they leave, and you try and do it in a very direct way, but at the same time, kind of not, sugarcoating it, just saying this is what you need to see to make those next steps. And sometimes like some kids react really well to that. And then some kids are like never been told that they weren't good enough because there wasn't that tryout process. And I think it's kind of tough of like, who's going to dig in and kind of take it to that next step. So I think it's important that you kind of playing different sports at a young age, just finding out what you really enjoy too, because sometimes players are, they jump into a sport because their parents played it, or their dad's a big fan, or the mom, or whatever it is. But I think at a certain level, you want to make sure that you try a bunch of different things, and then you're increasing that athleticism, because anybody that comes to, when you watch them play at any sport, when they just have that athletic gene to them, that like, wow, the hands, the IQ, the explosiveness, all those things, I think it's never going to hurt your hockey.
And talk about the spring camp. Like, say, what were you impressed with a couple weeks ago here in the Soo?
Yeah, the new facility, first and foremost, I thought was excellent. Like, I think it was something that we've always.
Except the snack bar is way over too far away.
Yeah, I'll leave that to you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the facility was great. I think it gives a great view of kind of the city and other avenues, because I think in the past we've kind of, when the ice gets taken out of the guards pretty quickly, and we're always kind of looking at where a good venue. So I thought that particular was excellent. I just think we haven't had many development camps where you can leave and like already project where guys are going to be. I think you always have those elements of like, once you draft a player, you're excited about them and you get to see them for that first time. But I think this was first and foremost was just something that, like, we haven't had that many high picks, and we had our picks in each round for the most part. So those were high in each round. And it was just like, I don't know. I took a lot away from it. I'm really excited about it. And I give a lot of credit to our 06s that were returning from our roster. We kept a lot last year just because we are obviously going to be a young team, but those guys didn't come back. And sometimes we've had moments in the past where guys come back and they're a little too cool for it because they played games in the OHL. And those guys, I thought, set the tone really well for it. And I thought the 07 group came in and was not kind of taking anything for granted either. So that's some of the best hockey I think I've had in my 8-9 years running that program.
So when we talked a little bit about the spring camp, obviously a lot of rookies, all rookies at the camp for the most part. One guy though, who I went in and watched a few of the scrimmages, and I understand he was the first round pick, but Brady Martin, I have been hyping him up on this show, just like crazy since then. He looked like a man amongst boys out there. I think he has the potential to go down as one of the, I know this is a lot of pressure on a young man, but I've been arguing, bold prediction that he could go down as one of the best Greyhounds to ever play. Just kind of talk about Brady and what he brings to the table, just as a human being and specifically as a hockey player, and what can fans in Sault Ste. Marie really be excited about to watch Brady come September?
Yeah, I think since the lottery went down, we went internally from that to truth be told with you. Like, I don't need to say where he was on our board, but
yeah,
super excited when knew he was going to be in the mix. He came off that OHL Cup where I was like, I remember having a conversation with our scouts, like, I don't know if it might have went too well for him here, that he might not even have been in that range where we were picking, which is kind of crazy to think about. And I think to your point, I think since then we've almost been kind of downplaying it because you don't want to put too much pressure on a young kid. But like when you get to hear this kid talk, and everybody that played with him, whether it was Team Ontario, his Waterloo team, spring term, whatever it is, when anybody that talks about him and any of the kids we interviewed, it was like, who was the toughest guy to play against? Who would you want to play with? His name just kept coming up. And, we went out, and he was obviously playing right up into the draft, went to his house there. He lives on a beautiful farm in Elmira. And it was kind of a situation where you just see the family, and it kind of just like, you're smiling because you're like, it all kind of lines up. I get it. Like he kind of came out, he's got the sleeveless shirt on. He's kind of just he's working the farm during the day, and he's talking about, and you think like, how is he going to react to this? He could articulate about every guy he played against this year, who he thought was tough, like just knew the draft inside and out, who the good players. And once you get to know him more, like he's somebody that's super confident, but like zero arrogance to him, but not scared of that big moment. And I think what you watch from him this year, just how he willed his teams into certain situations. And I'm just excited to get him playing with our guys. And I think he's going to be somebody that, we've had a lot of elite players come through here, and guys can take time. And sometimes there's a lot of pressure on each one of them that we draft and come in here. But I think Brady's not going to take too much time before he kind of solidifies where he needs to be in the lineup, and not just the lineup, but in the league as a whole too. So yeah, I share your enthusiasm for sure.
For the Soo Greyhound fans, who would you compare him to, so the fans would know who some type of player that we're looking at?
I'm always careful with kind of comparables, but like he skates well, he plays hard, he's got a cannon of a shot, he just competes on all sides of the puck. Like he's just, I don't know, he's just a real smart center that I think a lot of times we've had elite centers come through, whether it's Hayden, Frost, different guys, and sometimes that first year they play on the wing a little bit just to get a feel where their body physicality. But Brady's also like, he's already got that strength to him, but he hasn't even worked out much in the gym. Like I think he's as much as we're kind of talking about it, what he can bring on the ice and in the gym, I think he's somebody that like he still has that raw sense to him, and I think that's what the most exciting part, because I don't think his ceiling's anywhere close. And he's kind of a cool example too. You talk about, where does players need to play to be identified and go high, and like, he didn't move around. He said he had different options to go to it, played in his hometown, and, different guys came to play with him because they were that much excited to him. But in terms of a comparable, I'll kind of plead the fifth on that. I don't know if I want to put a label on it, but he's definitely, if you were at development camp, you kind of get a sense of what he's going to be. And right as his skates hit the ice here in training camp, I think everyone's going to get a good sense of what he's going to bring to the table as well.
And you brought 14 new draft picks. And when you're drafting players, again, you say you talk to parents and stuff like that. And I know you have to fill some holes on the roster. You don't want to move kids in too fast. How do you approach that when you're talking to players and families?
Yeah, I think there's all different factors. I think you want to make sure that you're not just bringing somebody in just because you drafted them in a certain spot. Like I think you've seen in the past, we've had guys that you take in the second round that play a year junior A or junior B. We've had guys that, make it as a fourth round pick. I think it's got to be three different levels. Obviously the on ice has to speak for itself. I think the off ice maturity, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but I just think moving away from home, you have to be ready for that. And then I think that kind of, physically ready to play and have that kind of 68 game schedule of, that grind of it. And I think some players need to make that step to kind of put that curve in their development. But I think some players, it's just, we watched it over kind of that 03, 04, 05 class, just with missing COVID. We were trying to be real careful of anybody that we brought in as a 16-year-old. You wanted to make sure you're not fighting to get in the line. They had to play. It had to be a situation like that. I think Landon Miller is a great example last year. Could he have kind of maybe got a 10 to 15 games in the OHL last year? Yeah, potentially. But I think it was a situation that it's better off him playing every night, being the guy, and then next year pushing for that spot. And I think he's a good example of kind of how we've used that. And I think with our lineup this year, I don't think there's a certain situation where, we have to just sign a player just to put him in. But I think at the same time, if someone's ready, we're more than capable of moving somebody out too to make space for him too. It's at that point. So I think you got to be careful. I think you got to teach, you got to teach every kind of case as its own and kind of evaluate as it goes through.
Now, I know you don't spend a lot of time in the dressing room, of course, but have you seen Landon Miller's humor yet?
Yeah, I know the personality very well. Even when we were drafting him, spent some time. He's just got that laid back. I think it's perfect for a goaltender, and I don't want to put a goaltender as a label, but it's just he's got a great personality. The guys love him. They love when he's around. He practiced with us a ton this year, and I think it's that kind of little thing that people don't talk about a lot. Whereas when you're any position, but goalie especially, when you're like when the guys in the room love you, it's just the shots get blocked. A bad goal can go in. You don't lose anybody on the bench just because they see the work ethic. And he's actually got that real calm sense of humor to him and just real go with the flow. But at the same time, he's a competitor. He wants to win too, so he can flip that switch as well. But yeah, he's got that perfect demeanor when you want a goaltender.
Yeah, I got to know him when he was with the Sioux Thunderbirds like this past season. And the humor is just when he was sitting on the bench, he was just not a class clown, but he just lightened that whole bench up.
I know. And then if they told him to get in there, he'd put his helmet on, throw out the gum, and he'd be ready to go too. Like he just has that kind of switch.
Exactly.
So obviously Coach Dean, he's been here for a number of years. What's the relationship like between you and Coach Dean, and what's the kind of working relationship that you guys have? And, do you see this kind of progressing going forward?
Yeah, I think, John, it's been an interesting few years. Like I said, it was kind of like you get years canceled, you get a COVID year, then you have a great run. And then I've really enjoyed working with John. I think he's somebody that's super passionate gets a lot out of his players on an individual basis. And yeah, it's been a real pleasure. We've kind of went through a little bit of transition there last year, just with a couple coaches moving on to the American League, which is always a great sign for the program. And I know this year as well, there's always kind of guys interviewing and looking to make that jump. And we kind of look at coaches a lot of times, scouts, coaches, players, all in that same development part that, you want guys here as long as you can. And at the same time, if they're ready to take a step and they're super excited about it, you want to be excited for them too. So, no, I think John's, he's a fun guy to work with, extremely hardworking, and, makes working together, a lot of fun day to day.
And on the other hand, I'm going to ask is, how's your working relationship with the majority owner, Tim Lukenda?
Yeah, Tim's been great. It's kind of, I was always in a unique situation where I was hired by his father and, Angelo Bacco, the whole board there, and kind of
No pressure on that one, is there?
Yeah.
I
Sorry.
know. I know. I missed that because I was kind of like I felt like I was that last kind of go between that, sitting next to Angelo for all those home games. You get to see the passion and the amount of pride he has for the Sioux, and just like it didn't matter if you were up by 5 or losing 3-1. He had this great sense of like he was always positive, but he always had this feeling of like something's gonna happen. And he was kind of funny. Like I remember even the 2018, we had all those double OTs in Game 7, and like Angelo would go and listen in the hallway because he just couldn't handle the press. He just couldn't handle it, and he was like, a pen would get thrown even if you're winning. Or it was just like he was always fiery, always had a ton of energy, and it was just somebody that like always could remind you, and because he sat in that seat before too. And I think a lot of people think they know how it works and but like he was just a great mentor for me, and it was great to kind of always pick his brain. And Tim's been great since he came in as well. He's given all the guys everything we can handle. I think, contrary to us not getting it, he was a big proponent of us even being in the mix for that Memorial Cup. And, we're a little biased in terms of how we thought that kind of went, but at the same time, he's done some great things for us. And I know we got a lot planned here moving forward too. And I think Tim's a massive part of that.
So based on that question, that was one of the questions we wanted to ask you. You guys had a remarkable bid. I mean, just by all accounts, it was just a top-notch bid that you guys put forward. And I think you guys deserve a lot of credit for what you did there. Obviously, it didn't go our way, and we ended up, the Memorial Cup ended up going to Saginaw. Do you see the Greyhounds in the city of Sault Ste. Marie applying for the Memorial Cup potentially next time it comes through the OHL? And is there anything that you think needs to be done in order to kind of put us over that hump?
Yeah, like I can't speak for next time, but I know there will be an application again. I don't think it's a situation where they just say, "Hey, that was our one shot." Let's sit out. Like I can't speak for where it's going to be at in 4 years, but I think in terms of adding to it, I don't think there's a ton necessarily that needs to be. I think as like anything, when you look at the facility, top notch right now, if you're doing this in 4 years or 8 years, as you've seen with the video board or any of the technology, things need to be kept with great upkeep. I think with this one, it was tough for everybody because it was a situation where there's some teams you look at, St. John's, you look at a few teams before, like they'll tank 4 years for it and just geared towards that. I don't know if that's ever going to be a philosophy we'd like to use in the Sioux in terms of, I even felt truthfully this year, and this was no pressure on anybody else, it was more so my own doing. I almost felt like it was a year where your hands are tied a little bit in terms of like, do you want to add that piece to the team that probably helps them out a little bit? Yeah, you probably should. A couple injuries, should you have probably done a couple things? Yeah, but you kind of have to save a lot of, those assets moving forward for potential moves if you do get the Memorial Cup. So I found it a little bit tough on that side of it, but I was still, I thought we had a great bid. I was super confident and I wouldn't have changed anything on that side of it. But I think when you look at it 4 years out, maybe you kind of do a little bit more planning on the outside, but I don't think that truthfully would have affected anything on this side of it. I thought we were right there, right up to the last minute that we were told we were not. And I think anytime you leave hockey decisions to a committee, you're always going to get an interesting answer. So I don't think it's anything that you should take any offense to. And I think that's why we like that the game's played on the ice and you get to decide it that way. So I think that's the most fair way to decide it. And, whenever it's a committee, it's always going to be left to interpretation.
And that was something I wanted to ask you, actually. This is kind of a tough question. So, feel free to bypass this if you'd like. But, how did you go about doing your job this year with exactly that in mind, right? Trying to balance for the future, and then you also have this Memorial Cup bid, which is a massive opportunity. So I thought about this quite a bit over the season. I don't understand how you did your job this year, or just with the pressures, right? How did you kind of balance that and not try and go out and sell the farm for the potential of getting the Memorial Cup over, the long-term success of the team? Like, was that something you grappled with a lot this season?
Yeah, it was that. And then it was kind of that mindset too of like, yes, you knew it was going to be a young team anyways. We were in a situation where we had this 02 draft class that pretty much everyone signed an NHL contract. We had this great 01 class that, majority of the guys got pro contracts out of too. So it didn't leave you a whole lot in terms of the OA group. So you're kind of looking at it. You have this super young group. You want to make sure that you're not kind of just leaving them to fend for themselves. But at the same time, you want to make sure that they got to get those reps because we got to see what we have internally, and you're hoping that you can kind of expedite it. So it was tough. Like I thought we did a great job in terms of like you find a Duarte off waivers, you try and kind of piece a little bit in, but it wasn't the situation where you're letting 3 picks go for an overage that could have plugged a little hole early and maybe kept a younger player slotted a little bit better in the lineup. So I think that was one tough part, but I think the toughest part I thought on the other side of it was you want everyone to have this long focus of like getting an understanding of what that development curve is going to look like as an individual and then as a team, but you don't want everybody going like, well, next year we're going to have this, or don't worry, next, like there's always that. I know even in my role, you're supposed to always keep an eye on the next year, but you still got to be in that moment. You want that frustration of the loss. You want that swagger coming in expecting to win. And I thought that was the toughest balance because you had a lot of players guys that didn't play in the power play before, brand new to the league. And it was kind of like, this is great. Understanding gets off to a good start. And then it was kind of like, how do you raise the bar of the expectation when they think everyone's focused on the year after? So I thought that was kind of the toughest part of that. But at the same time, like I said, with the bid we were putting together, I was completely confident that this was the right move to do. And I think regardless of how it turned out, I think you're going to see the dividends pay off very early for us with a lot of young guys. And luckily for us, it was an extremely strong draft class coming in this year too. So if you're going to pick early, this was a year to do it too. So I think that might be something that we look back on that we didn't plan on it, but wow, amazing what it means for the franchise.
Yeah, I was impressed almost with, I don't want to say the restraint, but I was impressed that, you were able to kind of roll with the guys you had and not kind of sell the farm for the hopes of getting something, right? I know a lot of people in the Soo, or some people in the Soo, kind of had that mentality, and I completely disagreed with it. So, I think you guys did a great job last year, and especially that Mark Duarte, picking him up off waivers. Man, I watched that guy last year every game, and I don't remember. I mean, he worked his butt off every single game. What kind of led you to going after him, and how you ended up getting him here?
Well, I think whenever we knew it was going to be a situation where you're probably, as I said, you're playing maybe 16-year-olds out of slot, 17-year-old. And what I mean by that is sometimes you want to protect them a little bit more. In some years, I'll use example of like we've had guys go, whether it's Sandine or different defensemen go in the back half of that first round, early second round, Timmins, and they play kind of in that, 4 or 5 slot early on in the season, kind of step a little bit higher in the lineup. We had 2 injuries out of the gate this year, and Andrew Gibson was playing in our top pair. And that's a guy who played in the Northern League last year that missed his entire minor midget year. And we just kind of looked at each other at one point, and he, I thought he did a great job right out of the gate, but you knew he was going to have to take that breath at one point of like, this is a tough matchup every night. You go into Flint and play Othman. You go into every kind of situation against Maggio and Windsor, and he was our matchup guy with him. And it was something that, you knew you were going to be playing against you guys kind of out of slot that I thought by the second half of the year, we're going to kind of pay the dividends for it. And I think when you were looking at overages, you wanted guys that weren't necessarily, hey, I'm 20, I deserve to get the limelight now, and only cared about themselves and kind of didn't understand where it was important to bring around those young guys. And I thought Thompson, obviously Calvin Watson, we knew on a personal level, he'd been such a great member of our team in the last couple of years, what they brought off the ice. And I think Duarte is the same way. It's just a kind of a guy that off the ice, like just unbelievable person to look up to for all these guys, what they do in practice. He played in Memorial Cup the year before, which was kind of an added bonus, but at the same time, he was just someone that brought it every day right into the last whistle. And I thought that was kind of a great example for our guys. And it was really cool to see him get rewarded with an American League deal, because I think, we had a pretty low waiver pickup at that point too, if you remember coming off last year's standings, because it was before the season started. And you never know what happens with these guys. If they kind of clear waivers, maybe he goes to school. So I think it's kind of a cool story for him, but it was definitely one of those that we look at. It's a win-win-win. I thought our team benefited having him here. I don't think it suppressed anyone's ice time, because I thought he kind of dragged a lot of guys with him. I thought he was great for, a Justin Kluche in his second half, because I thought he really exploded in terms of where we thought he would be, kind of a little bit slow out of the gate. And I give Mark a lot of credit for, bringing him to that point too. I think you're on mute there. I can't.
Can you hear me now, Kyle?
Yeah, perfect.
Sorry about that. I must have hit something.
No problem.
So my wife always says I like to stir the pot. This one here with social media, you see it all the time. Draft. Why didn't Raftis draft more local boys? How do you answer that question? Again, you know how the Sioux fans are, right? So
For sure. Yeah, I think we're always kind of look at it that when everything's equal, I think you always take a local guy. I think in a situation for how it kind of lined up this year, it just didn't kind of fit the way the kind of draft board came together, whether they were coming up on the next pick, you can't really speak it, and then they kind of go in that next round type thing. Yeah, for us, I think there's always been kind of a nice mix of having some local guys on the roster, but I think at the same point, you don't want to kind of reach just to have local guys on it. But I think if they're warranted, and the reason I kind of say that, I do believe, and it's not that the organization puts it, I think it adds a little element of pressure on some of the guys when they play.
I was going to add that next. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think most guys are capable of it. I think it's their dream. You talk to a lot of them before the draft and they're super excited about it. But I think you want to make sure that you're not just forcing them in the lineup because they're a local guy, or you don't have to kind of push them into a situation. I think you want them in the right spot. And then that way, when they make it, it's on their own merits. And it's not because we're just trying to fill a quota on that side of it. So I think we've been lucky, Cole McKay even helped out at our development camp. He was one of our coaches, different guys over the years that we've had kind of come through that have been locals, have been, great ambassadors for us. And I know, it means a lot to them and their family when they get an opportunity, but it's also a little element of that added pressure of playing at home and living through that boyhood dream that, maybe as a 16 or 17-year-old playing, maybe they're at a position in the lineup in a different market. I don't think maybe it's, there's a little bit more patience with it. Whereas I think sometimes in their hometown, and we're no different than other spots. I hear every OHL GM talks about it the most. They're kind of watching their local teams because they want to make sure that they got a good feel of it. But yeah, I think that's kind of how our focus has always been. And that's something that, I think the players get a lot out of, and it makes them earn that much more when they get into that room that they've cherished.
So a couple more questions here before we let you go. One that I've always been impressed with the drafts of the Soo Greyhounds later on in the draft. It seems like the Hounds get a lot of free agent guys, and it's, guys in later rounds that end up making the team. Can you just talk a little bit about your scouting staff and just kind of what they bring to the table and the job that they do to kind of make your job easier in a sense?
Yeah, I think a lot of times guys, when they're looking at the later rounds, they just kind of throw up their shoulders and they kind of think like, oh, well, it's just a pick, what's it going to mean? But I think for us, and early on in the first few years I was there, we had moved out so many picks that we were like, we needed some of those guys to show up, or some of those free agents. It was kind of that much more important to the roster. But I think it's also that element of you stick with that process you have in place, whether it's the 3rd overall pick or the 14th round, you're still going off the same reports in terms of what you're looking for. You want those same things. And then we kind of use that mode of, as you get a little bit later on in that draft day on the Saturday, it's more of a little bit of that focus of, in 18 months, what's going to be that something that, flips a switch or pops on it. And I think we try and always eliminate, some of the old cliches. We try and be real articulate. If you don't think a kid's got a good skating, what's wrong with their stride? Is it going to be a strength issue? Is it something that can be coached? Is it just too far gone that we can't correct it? Is it a size thing? There's always, we kind of talk about, you have those 5 tool players, and as the day goes on, there's going to be a little bit, hey, maybe they got these 2 tools that if something else can get in that group, how, can they make a step here in 18 months when we need them to kind of fill that role at 17 or 18 or whatever it might be. And I give the guys a lot of credit because, some of these free agents that come in late round picks, it's not only because, they're identified, which someone went to bat for them. It's also that we kind of view it as our training camp that, once you're there, it doesn't matter like where you got drafted. We're taking the best group here. And sometimes, like every other draft, a guy could go a little bit earlier. Maybe they think they're real good, didn't have that much of a summer, and all of a sudden someone passes them, to your earlier point. And I think sometimes you get some guys that have that chip on their shoulder that kind of put that work in, and all of a sudden they pop out of nowhere and it looks like a great story, but it's something that like they just keep working at it and they don't care. And for us, coaching staff, once you get to training camp, it doesn't really matter where they get drafted. Like we joke that somebody brought you here, so it's going to look good regardless once we sign you. It's not something that we're trying to go out of our way to say, hey, this is great, it looks great, we signed this guy that was a late pick. No, if you deserve to be there, you deserve to be there. So I think it's something that we try and stick with that focus, and I think the kids read through that message, which starts at development camp, and I think it's something that, you know, it's fair to everyone right across the board, and I think it helps us kind of stick to that process. And I on top of kind of our scouting staff, our director of player development works with a lot of our draft picks that aren't on our roster. And I think sometimes when you see guys getting moved out or different things like that, it's hard to kind of predict or explain to people when you're like, well, we have this guy coming, and, you know, what do you mean? He only played, you know, U18 hockey last year. What do you mean he's going to step into the spot? And like we joked about Ty Karche, like I remember that when we moved him on the power play, I remember somebody saying like, well, he scored 4 goals the year before. But you kind of, when you have that behind the scenes knowledge of what that player's put into it, you know, these guys can pop a lot quicker when you see what's kind of behind the madness in terms of, you know, their work ethic, what they put behind the scenes. And I think there's a ton of great examples of our development in the last few years. And that's why it's kind of been the most fun is when you kind of sit at the same table when a lot of guys are signing their OHL agreements with us, and then you get a chance to kind of be the witness on their NHL contract a couple of years later. So it's pretty cool, but you see the work, and it's definitely not overnight success, regardless of who you are or where you've been drafted.
So just, you know, since we talked about scouts, I just want to talk about one in particular. Obviously, you know, Kyle Barber, he's been a friend of the show for a long time for us. We've had him on a couple of times, and he's just been outstanding. You know, just talk about the job that Kyle's done for you guys. And, you know, you guys have taken a lot of Ottawa players over the years, and you guys have taken a lot of Ottawa players high, right? Now, obviously that's his area where he scouts, but, you know, just giving him a little plug here, but just talk about the job that Kyle's done for you guys down in Ottawa.
No, Kyle's done an amazing job. It's funny. They made a switch a few years ago to go to kind of a U18 only program. They didn't have the kind of minor midget at that point that would go to any of the tournaments. And there was always this misnomer, I thought, in that Ottawa area that a lot of them didn't want to play in the league. And I felt like some teams would really shy away from them. You know, similar to kind of American players, there's a spot in the draft where they go, but at the same time, it wasn't, you know, the same as taking a kid from, you know, the Alliance or the OMHA or different things like that. And it's funny, you always read the clippings from, you know, different OHL teams, and they talk about how hard it is to get players to play there and whatever it might be. And then sometimes you look at our roster, to your point, and, you know, there's 4 or 5 guys from Ottawa, and like Ottawa to the Soo is not exactly the closest spot here. And I give, you know, obviously we've had a lot of success with them, and that always helps. But at the same time, I give Barbs a lot of, you know, respect in terms of when the people in the rinks know who does the work and who's there, and, you know, very easy to get information, get an understanding of the program. And he does a great job, because obviously I'm involved when we get to a certain point with these guys. But, you know, every time we just joke, sometimes Kyle thinks when he calls these kids, they're not sure who it is on the other line, if it's me or him. So they're like, I saw Kyle from the Soo, and I give him a lot of credit, because sometimes I get the extra credit on top of it, because they think, oh, this guy's everywhere. He's in Ottawa on Monday, showcase. He was in the Soo on Sunday at 2:00. But no, Barbs has done a great job for us. And not only the Ottawa kid, he does a lot of crossover for us, and he's in the rinks 5-6 days a week, and he loves it. And he's somebody that's 5 minutes into talking to him, he'll tell you he was born in the Soo and he lived here, and he's so proud of his roots here in the Soo. And yeah, he definitely bleeds the red and white for sure, and he's done a great job for us.
Yeah, he's a great guy. All right, I'll throw it to Jay, and then I got one more for you.
Yeah, this is my last one. Next month is the draft. When it comes to every draft and you have players drafted that have gone through the system, how does it feel as a GM and the coaching staff that player is potentially moving on to the next level?
I think it's a really cool moment. I think this is basically every player that comes to our training camp. That's one box they want to check, but the dream's always to play in the NHL. And I think that draft day weekend is just special. You see the families, everybody's dressed up. It's a really cool moment for them, because it's kind of that dream that everyone has in the back of their mind, but deep down, how many of them really believe that they were ever going to be in that spot? I think everyone just keeps their head down and keeps working at it. But yeah, it's really cool to even have a small part of that when you see guys selected, and just see their families. They're usually in a huge group when they go down there. But yeah, it's a huge pride in terms of knowing a lot of these guys when they're 15, 14 years old coming up, and then seeing them kind of at 18 enjoying that moment. But yeah, it's definitely does not get old. I'll tell you that from
And one question I meant to ask earlier, sorry, is when it comes to the OHL, like come to the fall camp, how does it work? And it's a lot of pressure on a family in that about, okay, am I going to stay in Sault Ste. Marie or am I going to maybe keep my potential NCAA? How does that work?
Yeah, it's kind of a quick camp that way. That's where I think the development camp plays a little bit bigger of a key, because development camp's a lot more of information. You're chatting with everybody. There's not as many decisions getting made. It's more so getting a feel for everybody, getting, who's this person? How does this work? Getting those kind of white and black answers kind of filled in a little bit more, because I think everybody has this, how does this work? I heard this. You always hear that a little bit. So I think we try and accomplish that at development camp. And then truthfully, once you get to main camp, you try and kind of start the camp a little bit slower in terms of adding in the older guys at times. And then you get a little bit of a feel for some of those first year guys where they kind of stack up. And then once you drop in kind of those returning guys, older players, it kind of really, you got to make some decisions usually pretty quick between that, 48-hour kind of range in terms of where guys are sitting. Other teams are kind of calling around, getting a feel of what their lineups are going to look like. But yeah, it happens very quickly. The real kind of where players are, to get to your point at NCAA, where the NCAA eligibility usually plays a factor, is kind of on playing an exhibition game. And we won't put a player in an exhibition game unless we've signed them or made a commitment to them on that level, because I think there's some of that goes on in terms of, well, we need to see you in an exhibition game, which I think you have to see them in terms of where they might slot in or where they're going to kind of work out in the lineup. But at the same time, if they're giving up something, I think you owe it to them to kind of see them in that spot. And I think deep down, you kind of know who's close. And I think it's, it's only fair on both sides to kind of push it to that level.
That's a classy move. That's good, because, you hear so many times, right? Kids play one OHL exhibition game and, everything's gone. So that I'm happy to hear you say that. All right. So before we let you go, going to play a little game with you. So what we're going to do is I'm going to name a player and just give us a 1-sentence line, 2 sentences about the player, if you don't mind. All right.
Sure.
Okay. We'll start with my favorite player from the Greyhounds roster this year. I cannot wait to see where this guy goes, but Alex Kostov.
He's a machine. Like, we saw him at development camp. I think he's almost touching 190 something pounds, and he still looks like he could put on another 30 pounds. And I know his dad is on him in terms of, like, where he needs to be. I thought he really kind of hit a spot last year in terms of, the type of player he's going to play with an edge. He's got he's got some good skill to his game. He's excited to score goals. And I think he's someone that's going to be in a lot of people's faces. So I'm happy to hear you say that.
Spencer Evans.
Spencer, he's a triplet. He's somebody that kind of
really
just continued to pop off the page for us. And he's got the physicality to him. He can snap pucks. I thought he did a great job for us when he came up in that kind of 9-game stint towards the end of last year. He had a great year, putting up a good amount of points, but I think he's somebody that's going to surprise some guys as well.
Matthew Virgilio.
I think Matthew was kind of put in a lot of tough spots last year in terms of where we had him in the lineup. I think he's got an excellent chip on his shoulder, and every kid we talk to, he's going to be, I don't know if he's going to be the rep moving forward, but every kid we talked to in the draft that was in that GTA area was like, yeah, I heard you guys, Matthew Virgilio's up there. Like, they just pumped his tires, and then all they heard is positives from the Soo from him. So I'm going to have to give him a pat on the back when he's back up in August, because he was a great ambassador for us.
Connor Clattenburg.
The sheriff. Connor, I think, kind of got a little bit of a reputation towards the end of last year in terms of the physicality, and he just has that look on him. He loves to play that physical role, and he's not somebody that anyone pushes him into that. He just enjoys that level of it, and obviously I think he's going to be a fan favorite, because I think he go into a lot of building. He was getting himself a lot of space on the ice, to put it politically correct, by the end of the season, and he's got a little suspension to sit out to start next year. Yeah. But once that's up, he's going to Ottawa Senators camp if he doesn't get drafted here coming up in the end of the month, which I think is going to be a great eye-opener for him to see. I always think it's that great balance of how close you are to some of these guys and then how big the gap is on the next group. So I think it's going to be a good eye-opener for him, and I think it's something that, having that dangle in front of him is going to be great motivation for the summer.
Christopher Brown.
I think Brownie's got a real silky smooth skill and a brain that I don't think whenever you have players like that at 16, I don't think a lot of people give you credit for it. And then when you try and trade for that at 18, 19 years old, it is very difficult to do. And I think Brownie's, as that strength continues to add to his game, I think he's going to be deadly. And I think he does a lot of things that you just cannot teach.
Okay, I got 3 more for you here. Tate Vader.
Best name on the team right now.
I know. I was gonna say, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, Tate had a good development camp for us, came off a great year. He's just got that great personality. He's going to add a physicality to us. He can kind of play up and down the lineup. But he's just that happy-go-lucky kid that's going to, I think he's going to surprise some people when he comes to camp here next year. We signed him last year. He played a couple games. He had a great development camp for us. And I just think with his demeanor, he got a real eye-opener of what it was like kind of day-to-day with us. And I think it's going to pay off.
Charlie Schenkel.
Charlie was probably, I would say, if you look back before his injury, I think he was in the top 5 of the goaltenders in the league. And I think obviously you're always missing your goaltender when he goes down at that spot, but I don't think everybody kind of realized the year he was pulling together until he got hurt. And he kind of slowly got it back once he came back from his injury. But if he has another summer like he did last summer, like the sky's the limit, especially when you pull that size, the athleticism, where he was at last year to where he can grow to. I'm super excited to see where Charlie can get to.
All right, 2 more. I'm going to throw this one in just because we didn't see a lot of them last year, and a lot of people had really high hopes for it. Owen Allard.
Yeah, Owen is another guy that he got hurt out of development camp last year. The playoff he had for us against that series against Flint, the speed, the size, the skill, like all those things. And I'm not being hard on him. I don't think he ever got back to that level with us last year. We tried to hide him a little bit on the wing at times, but I think he's somebody that, we really missed and somebody that we had penciled in to play high in the lineup. And he's going to be somebody that, to your point, I think you'll see in October, November where he's going to be, and you're going to go like, yeah, I forgot about him. Of course he is where he's supposed to be. But yeah, he was kind of the forgotten guy last year for sure.
And finally, the captain, Bryce McConnell-Barker.
Yeah, I think Bryce, it was looking at how the year was. I know he put a ton of pressure on his own shoulders last year. He had an unbelievable year when you look at just being an 18-year-old having to lug the amount of offense he had to do for us last year. And on the off ice, I remember having conversations with him, and I hope this isn't too much inside baseball, but like he felt a lot of pressure that like we had a streak there where we had only been in the second round or above for a lot of years. And I remember him sitting down like, I don't want to be the captain of the team that doesn't get us to back at least that or above. So I think he put a lot of pressure on his own shoulders. I think he's somebody that's going to be on the World Junior radar next year. And I think having signed his contract, spent a little bit of time in Hartford here in the spring, I just think he's going to have that kind of pressure taken off his shoulders, and he's going to be able to show everybody what he can do night in and night out. So I'm super excited to get him back. And now I think he's going to really take on that ownership of being a leader, which I think he was there the second half. I think we knew with the team, we wanted him to be the future leader, and it was kind of, thrown right into the fire, truthfully. And it was kind of when it's not going the way you want it to go, I think that's when you really kind of learn how to be a leader. It's easy when you're winning games to be the good guy in the room with high fives, but it's a different element when you kind of have that pressure and a lot of guys looking to you for answers. So I think, taking that pressure off of next year is just going to unleash him.
Yeah, I was beyond impressed by him last year. Just the way he played, he grinded every game. I really was really impressed with him and can't wait to see what he does this year. Well, Kyle, listen, I can't thank you enough for doing this, man. Great interview, gave us a lot, and we really appreciate this. I know that, growing up in the Soo, the job of the general manager of the Soo Greyhounds is not the easiest job in the world. But you know what? You've spoiled us up here in the Soo with some outstanding hockey teams over the years. We really appreciate the job you're doing. Keep it up, and hopefully we can have you back on during the season or right before the season, possibly, just to talk a little bit more about the team. But thank you again for doing this, and thank you for continuously putting out a contending team for the city of Sault Ste. Marie and representing us well. We really do appreciate it.
I appreciate the kind words, and anytime I can jump on, I'm more than happy to. And I just hope everyone's as excited as I am to kind of see where this team's going to get back to next year. And I don't think it's something that we're going to be patient in terms of waiting to get there. I think we're going to surprise a lot of people right out of the gate, and I think it's going to be exciting hockey right from day one. So I can promise you guys that too.
And the final thing, Vegas or Florida?
I'll go with Vegas.
How many?
6.
Well, thank you, Kyle. We can't thank you enough.
My pleasure, guys.
All right.
We'll talk soon.